Alright, so the recording has begun, and as I was saying, a lot of coding for you, a lot of just, I will code locally as well, although all of this I've already coded before the class and I've already posted. So if you want to look at the final code, it's already present on 100x devs cohort 2/week 13, which is this repository right here. So you can look at it if you want. I would urge you to just code along with me, so you're able to practice. The worst thing, in a course that happens is you're able to understand everything but not code it. So the goal of these classes is to make sure you code a lot. I will also code, but I will keep a clock on the side and make sure, as 90% of the class is able to complete the code, we move on. Cool. That's all the context for this one. What we are building is a medium-like application. Specifically today, I think we'll be able to cover the first maybe 12 points or 13 points, which is just the backend bit. Hopefully we're able to cover all of it. Tomorrow we will do the front end, which should be straightforward. It just depends on how aesthetic we want to make it. That's the gist for today. Cool. Shall we get right into it? Are you guys excited? Let me open chat. Are you guys on the page? Let me do a quick poll just to understand. Have you already covered all of these technologies? Yes, no. So whatever I've written on screen, that includes TypeScript, Cloudflare, in deploying NPM packages. Where are you? Have you covered all of this? Yes or no? Yeah, expecting 50-50 it is. Cool. So yeah, that's all the context. Let's get right into it. Let's kick things off by initializing a backend. So when you're building a medium-like application, what is medium? It is this thing right here. Call it Notion, call it Medium, does not matter. A blogging website where you have a bunch of blogs, and if you open a blog, you can see everything that the user has written. This has a lot of things inside. It has headings, links, images, so on and so forth. We won't make this too fancy. And if we get the time, we might. But we'll kick things off with a simple application like this. So we have to build a backend for it first. So to kick things off, create an empty project, mkdir medium or whatever you want to call it. Go into that folder and initialize a backend using Hono. If you remember from the Cloudflare class, Hono is a library that says fast, lightweight web standards. It's basically a library very similar to Express, only Express does not work very well on Cloudflare workers or a bunch of these edge environments. Hono does. Hono has been built for edge environments, for serverless functions, which is why this is the library we'll be using today. It will make us comfortable with the syntax, also help us make a very cross-platform application that you can run in Node.js. Also, you can run on many providers, Cloudflare workers, Dino, Bun, so on and so forth. That's why we're using Hono as a library. This is the command to run to initialize the project. I'm going to do the same. So I'm going to open my terminal, go into a folder. First create a top level folder called Medium blog, and inside this is going to run Hono at the rate of latest. The directory I'm storing it in and would urge you to store it in would be backend. So basically our final project will have a bunch of directories. Make sure you have a top level new folder called Medium blog, inside which you are initializing the backend. If you look at the final code base, it has 3 top level folders. We're initializing the first top level folder. Eventually we'll be initializing the others as well. So make sure you have a folder inside which you're initializing the backend. Cloudflare workers as the environment. Do you want to install dependencies? Probably yes. Package manager, feel free to select any. I'm going to select npm just to keep things simple. And good to go. Open the root level folder in Visual Studio Code. And this is what it should look like. You should have a top level backend folder inside which we'll be writing all of our backend code today. Wait for like 20 more seconds and then proceed, but hopefully this is straightforward. Also, if you feel like the class is going slow, feel free to go to the next section right here. It's very elaborate, so you don't really need me to guide you. You can, sprint past the tutorial and call it quits when you reach around step 13ish or 14ish. Cool. 5 more seconds and then we'll proceed. Cool. Hoping this was straightforward and hence going to proceed without a poll. Eventually we'll do polls. Let's try to explore the file structure. It has an empty Hono app for me here. Hono, as I said, very similar to Express. It's a HTTP framework, only it works in multiple environments, including Cloudflare workers. Express does not. Let me open a terminal and run npm run dev and see if it works or not. So whenever you open the terminal, make sure you're going into the backend folder, and in the backend folder running npm run dev, because the backend folder is where your backend code resides. The root folder has nothing. So make sure you cd into the backend folder and run npm run dev. Once you do, it will show you a URL that you can go to. It says hello Hono over here, which means you have a basic application running. At least locally, you can now start to develop and write your application logic. Let's see if we're good to go. I'm assuming pretty straightforward, nothing too complicated here, and we should be able to move to the next slide. %. Let me open chat. We don't want the start to be so have such skewed metrics. So let me see what's up. Mostly people are just taking time. For the people who are able to do it, next slide. Initialize handlers. There is a solution here, but I would urge you to go to Hono and read through the docs and figure out how you can create your routes, the routes that are needed for an application like this. For the people who are facing issues, anything specific I have missed? Anything you've just started here? Any specific doubt that you have? Is there any difference between Hono and Express? There are a lot of differences. Is there any difference between Spring Boot and Express? Yes. Is there a difference between Next.js and React? Yes. There are separate libraries. They do separate things. In the end, the goal is the same. But yeah, they do completely separate things. They're different libraries. I mean, they do the same thing, but their syntax is different, written by different people, maintained by different people. Is there a big difference between Hono and Express? Yeah, they're very different in the syntax. They're very different in how you create middlewares. They're very different in how you return responses. So the syntax is fairly different compared in both the frameworks. Cool. I guess that's the only common question that people have. If you have not, you can try to follow along if you have missed a few things. We're going very basic. That said, if at some point you feel, oh, I don't know, understand this, feel free to drop off. You just have to run. Sumit, are you in the right folder? Just make sure you're in the right folder. That's the only thing I can see here. You are in the right folder. Run npm install, Sumit. You have not run npm install. All right. I'm going to proceed now. But for Sumit, just run npm install and then npm run dev. Step 3 is initialize the handlers. So currently there's a very random handler over here which does nothing. Eventually our application will have 5 routes. 1 route for the user to sign up, 1 route for the user to sign in, 1 route for the user to create a blog, 1 route for the user to update a blog, and 1 route for user to get a specific blog given an ID. Eventually, as I was creating this, I realized there are a few more routes that we need. For example, we need a list of all the blogs, right? If I go to medium.com. Yes. We're good. Thank you. If I go to medium.com, I see all of these blogs one below the other. So we should eventually have another endpoint called get blogs, which gives me all the blogs that currently exist on the server. Not going there yet. To kick things off, just these 5 routes, I showed the solution I shouldn't have. Can you quickly create these routes? Don't have to do anything, just have to initialize 5 routes. And I've also given the final route that's needed and the method that is needed. There is already a hint here, so I'm assuming it shouldn't take too long. But that's the only hint I will give, and give you guys another minute to code this yourself. After the minute, we will do a poll and see how everyone's doing, and then if this is too difficult, it might be too difficult for a lot of people, so don't worry. It can all be in the same file, by the way. You don't have to structure your project well, although there is a hint over here for if you want to create separate files and do very nice routing. But for now, everything in a top level index.ts is fine. Let me also start to write the code. There was a minor bug in this doc. The last endpoint is actually /blog/:id, which means /blog/1/blog/2. Very similar to Express. This is a dynamic parameter, and this was missing before. I've just fixed this, so make sure you're doing the right thing over there. Let me zoom in a bit. Alright, 10 more seconds and then we proceed. Again, the solution is here. If your typing speed isn't much, feel free to copy it. But I've written it. I'm giving you 20 more seconds to try it out locally. The water in Paris is extremely expensive. It's like €2 for a bottle. Alright, I think we should proceed. Do we understand what's happening here? Do we understand the initialization? It's just a different library other than Express, but everything else is pretty simple. At least the syntax right now looks pretty simple. It does not have a request and a response, but that's because Hono gives you a single object called, which you usually name C, which basically means the context. So C here stands for context. Context basically means it has your request, your response, and 10 different things. So yeah, thankfully, hopefully this is not too difficult and you were able to initialize the 5 endpoints. Next up, initialize the DB. Here comes the mildly complicated bit if you have not done Prisma before. Prisma is slightly hard to bootstrap. It's very easy to connect Mongoose. It's very easy to use the PG library. But when you're using Prisma, especially when you're using Prisma in a serverless environment like we are right now, things get a little tricky. So here is where, there are a lot of steps. As you can see, there are 8 steps. Let's go one by one. And yeah, here is where, I would see a lot of trouble. Okay. Number 1, get a connection URL from NeonDB or avian.tech. So just get a free Postgres server on the internet. Don't get one locally for this one. I'll share the reason later on, but you need a cloud server. So either go to, I'm assuming / hoping a lot of you already have this because I announced this in Discord yesterday. But just go to avian.tech or go to the other one, avian.io, and sign up and get yourself a Postgres database. I already have one right here, but if you don't, pretty straightforward. Just go here, sign up, select Postgres as the service, create service, Postgres, and then create a free one for you really quickly. I already have one, and here is my connection string URL for it, which basically means how I connect to it. This has my username, password, hostname for my Postgres database. It's completely free. You can get one as well. I'm going to give only 15 seconds for this one, unfortunately, because I mentioned this yesterday and there's a lot to cover. Hopefully you already have it. And if you don't, now's your time. Quickly sign up and get yourself a Postgres URL right here. 10 more seconds, then we'll proceed. All right. Now, since we're using Cloudflare workers, and what does Cloudflare's workers do, or generally any serverless environment does? If this is the world map, this is the world map. Let's say there are a lot of countries here. Whenever you deploy a Cloudflare application, it gets deployed in mini machines all around the world. It's called serverless for a reason, because there are a lot of servers and your backend application will start everywhere. If people in India want to visit your backend application, they get it from here. If people in the US want to visit your backend application or hit a route there, they get it from here. Which means there might be hundreds of mini machines running your code. And this becomes problematic because this means there are hundreds of these machines trying to connect to your database. You don't want 100 open connections to your database, or you might want it, but unfortunately Postgres doesn't support thousands of database connections. There's a limit to the maximum connections that you can create. This becomes problematic when you're using serverless functions. So whenever you are using Cloudflare workers, AWS Lambda, Vercel Edge, does not matter the service. If you're using a serverless offering, you cannot directly connect to the database. You have to connect to the database through what's called a connection pool. This is something we covered in a video in week 12. But the idea is, if you're using either Cloudflare workers or some other cloud service, each one of your serverless function connects to the connection pool, and the connection pool connects to a database, or the connection pool maintains like a single connection to the database. Each of your small mini machines don't directly connect to the database. Which means after we have created the database, we also have to create a connection pool. Prisma provides us that. If you've always been curious, how does Prisma make money? How is Prisma is a funded company considering they're only an ORM? The answer is this. This is how they make money. They give you access to connection pools, caching, making your database fast, 10 different things. And that is what you need if you're running your backend code in a serverless environment. And since we are doing that today, along with the connection URL, you need another URL, your connection pool URL, and you need to create a connection pool. For that, you have to go to this website, and you can do it. There are many ways to get a connection pool, but since we're using Prisma, we're going to use their offering. It's also free. So go to this website. Again, we've covered this in an offline video. This is the first time you're seeing this. Might be a little overwhelming if you've already seen this. I'm hoping this is straightforward. And I also mentioned this yesterday. Okay, you should have a URL ready. Cool. So if you go to prisma.io/dataplatform/accelerate and log in, so you can get back or create a connection pool for yourself. What are you doing when you're creating a new project or creating a connection pool? You are telling Prisma, yeah, I have a database out there, but I don't want people to directly connect to it. So please create this thing right here. Create a connection pool, which the name suggests will maintain a pool of connections to the database, and your end users can connect to this connection pool. Your end application doesn't directly have to connect to the database. Why is it needed? You cannot have multiple connections to the database. You can have as many connections as you want to the connection pool. Cool. All right. The way to get a connection pool is go to console. Whatever the website was, create a new project, give it whatever name you want, and then select accelerate. Global database cache with scalable connection pooling. We don't really need the database cache. We need scalable connection pooling, which is why we are using this service. Click on enable accelerate. It will ask you for your database credentials. What is this? This is the connection pool. It needs to know what your final database is, which is why it is asking you for this database URL. Just copy it from either neon.tech or avian.tech and paste it here so that it knows where to create those connections to. Select the region. Usually the region that you're selecting here should be the same as the region on Avian Tech, wherever I have deployed my database. No easy way for me to see it here, but you probably want them in the same region so they're very close to each other. Doesn't matter right now. And click on Enable Accelerate. This will give you back, also click on Generate API key, and this will give you back your Accelerate URL. This is telling you, bro, just connect here. This is your connection pool URL. This is your URL to this thing right here. In your Prisma application, in your backend finally, please use this. Do not use the final database application. So hopefully that's straightforward. And this was probably straightforward already if you've already seen week 12 videos. So keep this handy. This is going to be useful to us very soon. So what do we need? We need the final database URL. We also need the connection pool URL. That's what step 1 and step 2 are. Shall we proceed? I'm assuming the issue is you've not gotten these right now because either this website is down or this website is down because a lot of people are visiting it. Take your time. We're not doing too much after this. So while I'm on this slide, feel free to get this and this. Next up, initialize Prisma in your application. So npm install Prisma, npx Prisma init. This we've done many times. This is the standard way to initialize Prisma in your backend application. I'm going to do the same here. When you run npx Prisma init, it initializes a schema.prisma file for you, this file right here. So just open this file and don't replace anything here. It also initializes a .env file for you. Open the .env file and put which URL here. Which URL should you put here? Can you guess? This is your top level .env file. This is where Prisma will pick up your database URL from. Should you put the connection pool URL here, or should you put the real database URL here? And you will be surprised with the answer. You have to put the real database URL here. Why, Harkirat? I thought you mentioned the backend application needs to connect to the connection pool. Yes. The backend application will not pick the database URL from here. We'll see where it picks from eventually. This .env file is where the CLI will pick up the URL from. By CLI, I mean when I run Prisma migrate. So I need to make sure my CLI connects directly to the database and not to the connection pool. Prisma does not support the CLI, the command line interface connecting to the connection pool, which is why this database URL needs to be your real database URL, which is this thing right here for me. I'm going to copy it and paste it here. Paste your own here, don't paste mine. And then move on to the next step. The next thing it says is add database URL to wrangler.toml. Now this file, the wrangler.toml file, which is this file right here, is what actually contains your environment variables that will be used by the Cloudflare workers. I repeat, whenever you deploy your application or even run it locally, whenever I run npm run dev, where will the environment variables be picked from? From here, the vars section over here. So if I remove all the comments from here and just uncomment this and this, here is where I can add my environment variables for my backend application. And what is my variable name? Database URL. What is the value? My connection pool URL. Here I will put the connection pool URL because this is where the backend application will pick things from, and our backend application is needs to connect to the real Prisma, the connection pool and not the real database. Is that straightforward? Are we good to go? Let me do a poll here. Only two things I've done: replace the database URL in one place, replace the connection pool URL in the other place. Okay, taking a pause here. Let me open chat. Is there something obvious I've missed? And again, if you understand this already, feel free to proceed. Let's see. In the Postgres URL, we have SSL mode set to require instead of public, so we won't need a CA certificate. Is that a question? Explain again. Hello, recap. I was trying to set up CMS locally. Are we going to use Docker locally for Postgres today? No, we're not. The reason for that is your connection pool URL cannot connect to your local database, so we cannot run database locally today. Why do you have both put and post for blog? One for updating the blog, one for inserting the blog. One request for once you're on medium.com and you actually, create a post, that will be the post request. Whenever you're in the post and you update it, that will be the put request. Any more questions before I proceed? I will recap this really quickly. It seems a lot of people want to recap. Explain the connection pool concept once more. You should go to the 12.6 video, which was posted like yesterday or day before, but I'll give you one more time the high level. Whenever you're using a backend application and you're deploying it in a serverless fashion, your backend should not directly connect to the database. Your backend should connect to a connection pool which connects to the database. If you want to read about this yourself a little bit more, Prisma on Cloudflare workers. This blog post covers this in detail. We have also covered this yesterday in a video, so you can go back to the video and look at it. What is the benefit of using a connection pool? To recap what we've done, we've gotten a database URL, we have gotten a connection pool URL because we're deploying it in a serverless fashion, and we've initialized Prisma in our project. Once we did that, we replaced the .env files database URL with my actual database URL with this URL right here, and I replaced my wrangler.toml file, which is where the backend application picks environment variables from. This is where, if I go to source/index.ts, if I want to access env.database URL, this will be picked up from wrangler.toml. This wrangler.toml file is where you put a bunch of credentials and your environment variables are also put here. Your backend application picks the environment variables from this file, which is why here I am putting what? The pool URL, because I want my backend application to connect to the pool and not directly to the database. Cool. Those are the only things we have done until now. Next up is when we actually initialize the schema of our project. We have initialized Prisma locally. We need to tell Prisma the shape of the data for an application like this. And what is our application? A simple blogging application. Let me full screenify this. If you've gone through the Prisma class, then this should be straightforward. If you have not gone through the Prisma class or not gone through the relationships class, in which we discuss how you can relate data in Prisma, then this might be a little complicated, but let me explain this. I'm saying I need two models. What are models? Databases, tables. If this is my final application, irrespective of if it was in Mongo or if it was in SQL, my application would have two tables: the users table and the posts table, or call it the blogs table, and they would be related somehow. Every blog will have an author, which will be a user. This is what my final schema should look like, and that is what I have described here in the Prisma syntax. If I was writing the same in SQL purely, I would have written a create table query here, create table ID, number, so on and so forth. But since I'm using Prisma, this is how I describe my model. If you don't understand this, then go back to the Prisma class. You'll understand how you can describe the schema of your application. The only new thing here is, rather than doing @id, @default serial, I'm doing @id, @default UUID and making this a string You don't have to. If you feel this is a little complicated, then feel free to, if I go back to the Prisma class, the syntax that we used there was, let me show you really quickly, this thing right here. You can also use this. The ID doesn't need to be a string, it can be an integer, an ID, and by default can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, an auto increment number. Or what have I done? I've said it will be a string, it will be an ID. By default it will be UUID. What is UUID? It's a popular format to create randomly, like very long random strings, so that there's a very low probability of collisions. There's a very low probability of two of them being the same. It looks something like this, a very long string. This is what it's like a standard. By standard I mean, it's a very specific way to generate a UUID, and there's a very low probability that if you generate a UUID and you generate another one, that they're always the same, which is why it's a very popular way to store IDs in a database. You don't have to store a string, you can store a number as well. Cool. That's how I've described my schema. Everything else, hopefully we've done many times, so it's straightforward. Not many times, but this is describing the schema of our project. I'm going to copy this and paste it. You can either copy it or write it yourself. Let me do a quick poll also to see how people are doing. Feel like I might be going a little too slow. Oh well, mostly good. 10% slow, 20% fast. Okay, 20% fast is problematic. So let me take a breather here. Any specific questions? If this feels slow, by the way, feel free to proceed, but if it does not feel slow, let's see. Error schema, password authentication failed. If it says password authentication failed, it means your credentials are either incorrect, or I have a call out over here. You might face issues while doing this. Try changing your Wi-Fi. If you're facing an issue while migrating your database, I will show you very soon. I face the same issues because my Wi-Fi doesn't let me connect to my database for some reason. So try changing your Wi-Fi. It will work. It might work. Yeah, a lot of people are saying can't reach the database. I would urge you to try this. I will probably see the same error when I try this locally. Let me show you really quickly. Why are the two strings author relation? Okay, what are the two strings? Okay, this people don't understand. You should go through the relationships class, but I'll give you a brief of it. Author is a user, and the author ID field here is how they are related to the ID field over here. So this ID field of a user and the author ID field of this table is how the data is related. That's what this field and this field means. There is a class that covers this in depth. Relationships in Prisma. You can go through that and understand it a little bit better. Explain step 4, and what have we done? I don't know. Step 4. Initialize the schema. If you don't understand this, it might mean you've not gone through the Prisma class. Let me explain what it does one more time. You are telling your database that this is the shape of my data. There will be a users table which will have an ID, email, name, password, and an array of posts. There will be a posts table that will have an ID, title, content, which means the actual data of the blog, published, whether or not this is published, true or false, author, which is a user, author is a user, and author ID, which is actually how you find who this specific post is for. So if you look at the final tables, they look something like this. The user table and the posts table, and the user table will have the standard name, email, password, so on and so forth, whatever the fields were there. The posts table will have a title, content, published, and author ID. This author ID is how data is related between these two. If there is one entry over here of a user with ID, let's say 1, and another entry here for a user with ID 2. The way data is related, the way both the tables are connected to each other is through this author ID. The author ID over here tells you who's the owner of this post, who's the person who created this post. That is why over here it says at relation, the author ID field here relates to the ID field over here. Cool. So the final author ID here, if it's 2, that means this specific field is related to this specific post is owned by this user, or the author of this post is this user. Cool. That's the mildly difficult part, or the part that you might not have covered in Prisma yet, which is how is data related. Do you need to relate data? No. You can totally remove this row and this row from your project. You don't need them. They are good to enforce some constraints. What do I mean when I say enforce some constraints? I mean your database will now not let you put anything in the posts table unless there is a corresponding author. If I put author 100 over here and there is no author here, then my database will complain. My database will be like, "Arey, you said that this author is related to a user, but there is no user with ID 100. It will start to complain, which is why adding these constraints is usually good, so that your database will block requests that are erroneous. That's why you enforce the relationships when you're creating your schema. Can I remove this line and this line and keep it simple? You can, but should you? Probably not. You should have relationships very clearly defined in your database. That's step 4. Then step 5 is where we're going next, which is actually migrating the schema, where a lot of you are facing issues. And let me just show you, I will most probably also face an issue because my Wi-Fi is also not able to connect to Avian, and it could also be because of the port. The port that I'm trying to connect to is very, as you can see, can't reach the database server at this. So here you can do a few things. You can either try changing your Wi-Fi. That is what I did a while back. I changed my Wi-Fi to my mobile data and it worked. This you won't be able to do, but like if you have another server somewhere, you can deploy it from there. So firstly, how many of you are able to run this command? I guess, is this question even needed? Are you able to migrate your database? Now, what does migration mean? I'll probably explain a bit, not too much, because we've covered this again in the Prisma class. But let me see how many people are able to actually migrate. Oh, most people are able to migrate. Well, 70%, not most, but a lot. Cool. So yeah, as you can see, basically I also face an issue. So don't worry too much if you face an issue here. Let me show you how I fixed it. And as I said, one way to do it is just change the Wi-Fi. The way I fixed it was I opened a terminal and I SSH'd into a AWS machine of mine. So I have an AWS machine running. I took this code, I put it on this AWS machine and ran the command from here. Because my AWS machine can actually connect to my database. My local machine cannot because I have a Wi-Fi issue here. But this AWS machine has its own Wi-Fi, very nice Wi-Fi. So this AWS machine is able to do it. I am not able to. If you are not able to do it, yeah, that's the only thing I can suggest. Try changing your Wi-Fi, or find a friend's machine and search into another machine and do it. Let me quickly push this code here and then run the migrate command. I actually don't have to because this specific database that you're looking at, this one right here, I created before the class, and I already cloned the repository on my AWS machine and ran the migrate command. So for me, my database is already migrated with this schema. For you, it might not have happened, and if it's a Wi-Fi connection, just try to figure it out. Is all I can say. Else, like if you want to drop off. But for the people for whom it did work, you probably see a migrations folder over here. Prisma/migrations. This folder is created for you. It has your migrations. It has all the SQL commands that will actually create this table and this table. Since it's not running for me locally, I am just going to copy the migrations from GitHub So you don't have to do any of this if it worked for you. If it did not work for you, then you can do what I'm doing since it's not working for me either. You can go to 100x devs code 2/week 13 and you can go to backend Prisma and copy over this migration folder onto your local machine. I repeat, you can copy over this migration folder onto my machine. So I'm going to create a new folder here, call it migrations. This would have been automatically generated if this command ran for me. Since this command did not run for me, I'm just copying it locally. Migrations. And if you look at the final SQL file that is created, it's a simple create table user, create table post. It has my SQL commands that will be needed to actually create the tables. So what did I do? Since it was not working for me locally, I pushed this repository over to GitHub. I pulled this GitHub repository over to an AWS machine of mine. On that AWS machine, I ran this migrate command. And then on this AWS machine, this migration folder was created. I pushed from my AWS machine over to GitHub, and then I copied over these files. Here I could have also just pulled the code over here. Do we understand how you can make it work if it does not work for you locally, the ad hoc route that I took? Do we understand this slight detour that I took to show you how it works, how I made it work for myself? Okay, cool, pretty good. Great. So now a lot of you, for the people for whom this worked, should see this Prisma/migrations/folder. The timestamp here will be different for you. The name might be different for you, but you should see this user and post table, and your database has also migrated if it has worked for you. What do I mean when I say the database has migrated? I mean your database, this AVM database that you might have, one second guys, AVM database that you might have now has the posts table and has the user table. All right, that's what Prisma migrations mean. Like when you ran that Prisma migrate command, npx Prisma migrate dev, it actually migrated your database. It actually ran these two commands over there. It also created a copy for you locally, but it also ran it over there, which means your database has migrated. This command ran. Next up, generate the Prisma client. After you migrate your database, if you remember from the Prisma class, the next thing you have to do is generate the client. Harkirat, what does client mean? It basically means, okay, finally when I go to source/index.ts, I need a user.find1. I need some place from where I can get, a user's object or a post object, because very similar to Mongoose, right? Mongoose used to give us a post object, which, I would do a find one on or create on. If you're using Prisma, you automatically generate these clients. Again, this will be a little more, you'll understand this a little better if you have gone through the Prisma video. But this is like a standard step you have to take whenever you change your schema, which we just did, which is npx Prisma generate. The only extra thing we're doing here is -- no engine, which is something you have to do when you're running it in a serverless fashion. Since we are using a serverless backend, we have to add the -- no engine flag. Hakikat, how would I know this? You would know this if you would have gone through the Cloudflare Workers Prisma blog post, where they share in detail all the commands that you should run and why you should run the no engine flag over here. All right, let me paste that next. And lastly, install @prisma/extension accelerate, which is again something they explain clearly on this blog post. And what is this blog post? How to deploy to a Cloudflare worker. So there's nothing, no knowledge that's needed here. How did I understand that I have to do this? I also went through their blog post and followed all the steps and realized, yeah, this is what I have to run. Now, the last thing you have to do is use your Prisma client. So copy over this bootstrapping code, which again you can find here as well, which lets you generate your Prisma client and then run all the commands on it. So if I copy the imports and paste it in index.ts at the top, I can now initialize a Prisma client and run prisma.user.insert, so on and so forth. So let me do that next, and then I'll take a few questions after this. Let me just quickly copy this, paste this in one of our routes, and then we'll see how this error goes away. But how are we doing? This class seems like a combination of being too slow and too fast. So let me do a quick poll. How's the pace? By which I mean, it's very slow for some people, it's very fast for some people. It's very bipolar outcomes. Oh, sorry, I asked the wrong question. Okay, 70% good, 20% fast, and 10% slow. We're going to optimize for good and slow. Sorry, good and fast. Basically means I'll take things slow. For everyone who is able to do this, go to the next slide and try to choose some glass and figure out what all it's mentioned here, a few extra things that are mentioned here. Try to read through this and try to do this yourself. For everyone who is still stuck here, happy to answer a few questions. Let me open chat. I'm assuming a few of you are stuck trying to migrate your database. In Postgres URL, we have SSL mode set to require instead of public. Won't we need the CA certificate? No. Okay, what does SSL mode equal to true even mean in a Prisma? What does SSL mode equal to require mean is the first question. Probably means how the certificate, the database needs to be secure, and there's probably a certificate in this specific host, but you did not have to generate it, AVN did for you. That is my assumption. I have no idea what the SSL mode require flag means. You can quickly Google require Postgres. Let's see what it says. I'm trying to configure an SSL certificate. Yes, so you do need a SSL certificate in your Postgres server, but thankfully AVN or whatever provider you're using have provisioned it for you, so you do not have to worry about it, if that was your question. Would it be better to connect to the database only once when the SV starts, or on every route hit? Probably on every route hit. Yeah, I'll show that very soon, but yes, you should initialize this Prisma inside a route and not outside. It might work outside, if I'm being honest, I don't know. The reason it is preferred to do it inside is because usually these functions are, a lot of times these functions are independently brought up in these workers. So you shouldn't pollute have anything globally present. Basically, you should avoid as many global variables as possible in a serverless application, because depending on the runtime, a lot of times they just start a specific function somewhere. So you might lose access to global context, which is why you'll find this in every tutorial. Will it work if you do it outside? It might, but yeah, I would initialize inside for that reason. Okay, I'll take questions until 3 more minutes. Okay, so just feels good to get something. Thanks to start. Should I continue the piece of code for now? I mean, this pick and choose. If this becomes too, if you feel you're getting overwhelmed, then just first stick to basics. Someone is saying database URL does not exist. We will fix that. That's what the next slide says. Google. Is there any way to interact with an online Postgres instance without installing Postgres locally or having an SQL editor like command? Yeah, there are ways. If you go to neon.tech, it gives you like an SQL editor. You can install PSQL, which is a CLI that lets you do it. There's something called pgadmin, which is a GUI similar to MongoDB Compass that lets you do it. So there are ways. Explain point number 7. Should we run this command? Point number 7. Yes, you should run this command. And why? Because this will bring a dependency for you, which you need. As you can see, I'm using this dependency here. So you need this dependency if you want to run Prisma in accelerate mode, by which I mean you want to connect to a connection pool and not directly to the main database. So that's why you need step 7, because you're using this library in step 8. Could you explain the AWS part? Why cannot we directly connect to the database? AWS part was something you can completely ignore. It's only relevant as an extra detail, but basically for me, whenever I try to run the Prisma migrate dev command, my machine is not able to connect to my Postgres database. There's some problem with this specific hotel that I stay in Paris every time. Every time I'm here, I'm not able to connect to my database. If I change my Wi-Fi to my hotspot, it works. So for that reason, I pushed my code to my AWS machine and ran this command over there, because over there it's using the AWS Wi-Fi, and the AWS Wi-Fi can connect to my database. I locally cannot, which is why I use this as a hack. I could have also just changed my Wi-Fi to my hotspot and migrated directly from my machine. That was the AWS thingy. And the other question was, totally missed the other question. Yeah, a lot of people are saying can't reach the database, and the answer remains the same. Change your Wi-Fi and try it. Getting error for .env, TypeScript is telling, TypeScript is telling you something. I see something here as well. We will figure out what the fix for that is. Let me do a quick poll one more time and see how we're doing. Shall I proceed to the next point? Are we good to go? Shall I proceed? Okay, pretty good, 90%. So let me proceed. But the people who are still facing issues, maybe you have not done week 12, week 11, which is, I know, this is becoming a little complicated. Cool. Next step is, so here is when comes a little bit of, you would have had to Google a bit if you did this yourself. I gave you a bunch of hints, but basically, if you currently are initializing this, firstly, the way to get an environment variable in this thing right here, Hono, is you get it from this C context. There is no easy way for you to get, const database URL equal to process. You cannot do this, which is something you might be comfortable with. Process.env.database URL. This is how I get the environment variable. The way you get an environment variable inside Hono is that you get it in this C variable. This C variable is very important. It stands for context. That's why we've named it C. You can name it whatever you want. But the idea is, when you were using Express, you got a request and a response, right? This had all the request things. This had all the response things. In Hono, this variable is what's called the context, which has all your request data, all your response data, all your environment variables, 10 different things. Whatever you need access to is present in the context variable. That's why it's called context. It has the context of your request. And all your environment variables also you will find in this context. If I try to log const db URL equal to c dot, you'll see env is present over here as a property. So c.env does exist, and this is where I can find all my environment variables from. Harkirat, how do we inject environment variables? As I said, in the wrangler.toml file. Whatever secrets your application needs, for example, this database URL, this will be a secret, right? You don't want the world to see it. I'm showing it to you right now, but you don't want to share your database URL with the world. So whatever these secrets you create, the place to create it is wrangler.toml. The place to use it is index.ts. The way to get access to it is c.env. the specific environment variable you're trying to access, which in our case is database URL. So this is what the syntax looks like finally. Only there is a TypeScript error. TypeScript is complaining, this thing on the right is not a string. I expect this to be a string. If I make this a string, then TypeScript will stop complaining. But if I do a c.env.database URL, TypeScript begins to complain. So here you have to figure out how to, specify the types of your environment variables. I repeat, you have to specify the types of your environment variable. Okay, bhai, this environment variable of mine, there's a database URL environment variable which is a string, and the way to do that in Hono is this. Whenever you're initializing Hono, you tell it these are my bindings, these are the environment variables that are present. How did I figure this out? I saw this error, I figured out there might be a way to specify it. I hovered over Hono, I reached this specific declaration, and I saw कि हाँ this is a generic, and the first thing it expects is an environment variable which has bindings and variables. It has two things. So I put bindings over here and then put database URL string over here, and then this warning went away. Is how I figured it out. You can figure this out by a bunch of googling as well, or you can remember this as the syntax. Whenever you have an environment variable in TypeScript in Hono, whenever you're initializing Hono, you have to pass that specific thing as a generic here, so that it understands that this is a string. It does not give you errors over here. Was this difficult? This probably was difficult. If you have not done TypeScript, this was very difficult. Looking at this only, a lot of people would have been like, what is happening? So you don't need this. I can totally command X this and add a TS ignore over here. If you want to completely ignore TypeScript errors for now, it is fine. You can do this and it's fine. It will work for today. But generally this is a bad practice. You should not have TS ignores in your code base. What is TS ignore? Okay, TypeScript ignore the next line. I know there is a TypeScript error over here, but ignore that specific error. So you can just go with this for now. You don't have to do all the fancy things that I did, or you can do the fancy things. Either way works. But let's proceed to the next point, which was the simple sign up route. Let's actually write some code now, and not worry about the 10 different things we had to worry about. It took us it's been an hour. It took us an hour to just bootstrap the application. We haven't written any logic until now. So let's actually write some logic and then we'll take a pause. What is the sign up route supposed to do? Await prisma dot user dot create whatever data the user will give us. And how do you get data inside Hono? How do you get the body inside Hono? If you remember from the Hono class, it is await c.body.json. I think that looks right. c.json. That looks right. Can someone figure this out? How do you get the body? I will send the slides later on. I can look at the solution over here, or Google it. Go to the Hono documentation, you'll find it. The way to get body is c.rec.json. All right. All right, let's just take a pause after this one. Seems like this became too heavy of a class, surprisingly. And the only reason I would think for this class to be heavy is if you've not done a lot of this, you've not completed until week 12. But yeah, this is what the code looks like right now. This is how the first endpoint has been created. Notice how different it is from a simple Mongoose application. So much code we had to write, so much TypeScript drama we had to do, so much bootstrapping we have to do with Prisma, but unfortunately this is how you write it. You can totally easily write it in JavaScript and use Mongoose as your Mongo as your database, Mongoose as your library, and keep doing that again and again. But if this is where this is how code is being written in the real world, you have to slowly move there and write it yourself. So let's do a pause after this and see how we're doing. I don't think I can go any slower. I think it took us 1 hour to write a single route. That said, this will become easier if you practice this a lot, and if you've gone through all the classes we did until now, which it seems like a lot of people have not. Do we understand? Ignoring the whole, TS ignore bit, just ignore it for now. Other than that, do we understand how I was able to get the body, which the user will send me? How was this done in Express? If you remember, it was rec.body. That's how we used to get the body in Express. How do you get the body in Hono? It is by using this specific c.rec.json. Why did I have to await it? We've seen this many times. If you remember, even when we were doing a fetch, when we got the response, we had to await conversion to JSON. Same thing is happening here. If you're converting your data to the JSON, you have to await it. This returns a promise. And then finally, we do a create. We have not done a bunch of extra checks over here. What if someone with this email already exists? We can do that eventually. But do we understand this basic Code that I've written, yes or no? Do we understand how we've written the first route? इसके बाद we'll take a break and then we'll try it out. Alright, 92% is great. Cool, let's take a 5-minute break, not too long because again we're going very slow. Opening chat, any questions? This will take like a week for us to do, I think. I explicitly gave type to C and env and it works. Yeah, you can do that, but that's the thing, right? You can do something like this. Okay, this has env, yeah, something like this. You can do this, but this is bad because you have to, give this explicit type again and again here and then here, and then anytime the environment variables change, you have to change it here as well. Whenever you're initializing Hono, the library itself is giving you a way to specify all the environment variables. So that is what you should use. Prisma, does this need to be repeated in every route? Can't we make this environment globally accessible? Yes. Oh yeah, that's the other reason. The other reason you cannot put this outside is because you don't have access to the environment variable outside. Harkirat, why not? Great question someone asked. Why can I not get the environment variable access outside? Unfortunately, this is how serverless environments work. As I said, every route might be independently deployed. It's not necessary that, all the routes are deployed together. So you should never even hope to have any access to any data in the global context. And that's probably why, you don't have access to global context here. All the context, all the environment variables, any other access to any other data that you might want, you will get it in this C variable. You will not get it outside. And that is precisely the reason you have to initialize Prisma again and again over here, because you don't have access to the environment variable outside. Can you? Most probably you cannot. I mean, Google it and figure it out. Let me know if that's the case, but I'm pretty sure you cannot get access to this environment variable outside. env waiver we are accessing in index will be accessed from .env or from Wrangler. It will be accessed from wrangler.toml. That is a good question. This .env file was created when I started Prisma. As you can see, it was created by Prisma. Whenever you're using Cloudflare workers, your environment variables need to be defined here. This is where index.ts is going to pick them from. The property email does not exist on type promise of any. The property email does not exist on type promise of any. You have not added an await over here. You're simply doing c.json. You need to add await the conversion to JSON. I'm getting an error that, okay, yeah, I think same thing. You've not awaited c.json. We'll restart in 2 minutes. I show video and if they get downloaded, put a certificate file Prisma for later CA certificate is provided AVI and we have to download it and put it there. Not sure if it's required though. Doesn't seem like it's required. Seems to be working for me without it, but curious. A lot of people are saying some certificate things. So show me the video and I'll tell you what it does. Will you please explain what are the diff in .config and .env files? The .env file has a significance of its own in Node.js or generally in any application. This is where you store all your environment variables. What is environment variables, Akira? It's a whole different concept, a language independent concept of whenever you have any code, for example, a Golang code or Rust code, your secrets are usually kept in what are called environment variables. The .env file is usually where you will put all of these. And that's why we've put it here as well. However, Cloudflare Workers does not worry about / care about / pick environment variables from here. Cloudflare Workers picks environment variables from wrangler.toml, which is why we've defined them here again and again. Cool. 1 more minute and then we'll proceed. Doubts. Okay, let's answer all of these doubts and then we'll proceed. How to get environment variable in Hono app? This is what is provided in the official documentation. Oh, you can do this. You can get access to environment variables outside, or can you not? Seems like you cannot. Here they are getting it inside the callback function of app.get. Let's see if that works. How to get it outside? For example, database URL. Seems like you can get it outside. Oh, no, the question is how do I get it outside, and the answer is probably not. Or is this giving you a way? No, it's not. Yeah, so you weren't able to figure out. You cannot get it outside, right? And this seems like just another way to access it inside the route. Let's see if this works outside the route, although I'm guessing it won't. Import env from Hono/adapter. Oh yeah, you need the context, right? Exactly. You need C to be able to fetch the environment variables. So you can't get it in the global scope. Google it a bit. My guess right now is there is no easy way for you to get, or any way to get environment variables outside, but Google a bit. You might be able to find something that leads you there. Alright. Shall we proceed, guys? Do you want to pause? I can cover this in an offline video. We can cover this tomorrow, or are we good to go? So let me do a poll. Shall we proceed, yes or no? Okay, mostly yes. So let me proceed a bit, which means for the next 20 minutes, and then let's take a pause at 8:30, and then let's decide what to do next, right? But let's try to cover a bit more. Let's at least try to write all of our backend routes. Cool. Simple backend route we have written, which is, this thing right here. But once the user signs up, what do they need back? They need back the JWT, because they've signed up. Even when they sign in, we return them back their JSON web token, which is what they send us back in every request. That's how we've done authentication again and again. So the next thing I ask is add JWT to the sign up route. Add JSON web tokens to the sign up route so that the user is able to get back a token that they can send back with every request. This is basic authentication. This is how we've done authentication many times. So hopefully what is expected is straightforward. The only extra thing is you should use the Hono/JWT library rather than using the JSON web tokens library that we used until now, because there's a good chance that the JSON web tokens library does not work in the Cloudflare environment, which is why Hono has created their own JWT library. It returns you functions very similar to the functions that JSON web tokens, the library we used to use, this one right here, used to expose. So the functions are similar. Just make the right function calls and try to initialize a token here and return that to the user. Figure out how you can do that in like the next 30 seconds. Given you already have this information, this library is something you can use, and then I'll code the same thing myself. More seconds. Again, the solution is already there, but try to code it yourself. Alright. So I first import sign from Hono/JWT. Then I say const user equal to await this so that I get back the user ID. And then I say token is nothing but sign ID, which is the ID of the user, and then give it a secret, and then I return back c.json. This is your token. So I wrote a few things. Let's look at, it's just 2 lines of code that I added. Number 1, I got back the user object from here. Why? Because I need access to the ID. And this ID I don't have when I'm generating the user. However, whenever you add something to a database, you get back access to the ID over here, which is something I need to sign the JWT with. So that's why the first thing I did was got back the user object. Then I said token equal to sign, and this is the object that I'm signing. You can make this more complicated. You can add the email here, but ID is good enough. Usually, the only thing that you need to sign the JWT with is this ID over here, which is what I'm doing. And then a secret to sign it with. I have just hard coded a string over here, but what should you do? You should ideally have this as another environment variable along with the database URL. Just like I have a database URL, you should have a JWT underscore secret, because this is also something you don't want hard coded in your database. This should be present separately. So ideally, this JWT secret should be present in wrangler.toml. Since I am putting it here, it also means I need to put it here in Hono if I was, defining Hono the right way. And that also means I can access it over here by doing a c.env.jwt underscore secret. Now this is giving me a type error because I haven't initialized Hono the right way. So you can just again TS ignore it, but ideally I would urge you to just initialize Hono the right way, and that's it. That's all you have to do to initialize the route. The solution is already out here, so if you feel like it happened too quickly, this is the final solution if you look at it. First initialize Prisma, then get the body that the user is sending you, then put this in the database, and then if the user does not exist, which basically means this request has failed for whatever reason, this will never happen, by the way. User will always exist, because if this entry fails, this will just throw an error. But yes, that's why we just, you don't need this check basically, because user will always exist. If this request fails, there will be an exception that will be thrown, so you don't really need this check. Either way, feel free to ignore these lines basically. Sign the JWT, return it to the user. Feel free to copy this, or I've written the same code here. If I run this now locally, let me show you whether or not it works, by basically going to Postman and sending this sign up request to /API/v1/signup. So if I paste this /API/v1/signup and I send in an email and a password, it takes a long time and it says internal server error, because I already have an entry with this email because I was testing this application before. I sent it again and now it returns me JWT object. Why? Because I did not await the creation of JWT. This returns a promise. Now if I try to send it, it will probably return me a JWT if I send a unique username that doesn't already exist. So this is how you initialize the sign up route. Took us a long time. Took us almost 1.5 hours to write the code for it. Let's recap everything from the top, and then we will proceed to the sign in route, which I'm assuming is fairly simple given you already have the sign up route. So feel free to code it yourself. Let me quickly recap what we have done from the beginning until now for everyone. We initially I just shared the stack, how we will be building this Medium application. Then I said initialize the backend, just create a Hono application, which is a very simple empty express-like application that we initialize by running this command. Then I said initialize some empty handlers which don't do anything right now. Very simple app.get, app.post for the 5 routes that we need. Then I said initialize the database, specifically initialize Prisma, which was a whole process in itself. You need to get a NeonDB URL, you need to get a connection pool URL, you need to initialize Prisma in your project. Then replace the right credentials in the right places in the .env file, the naked Postgres URL, in the wrangler.toml file, the Prisma accelerate URL, and then initialize the schema of your application, which in our case is a very simple: create a users table, create a posts table, migrate your database, and then generate the Prisma client and add these extra dependencies, which is something that you need in a serverless environment, specifically in Cloudflare Workers. Initialize the client and then go from there, start to write your application, and we wrote our very first route, which is the sign up route. Do we understand this, and can we proceed to one more route for today, which will be the sign in route, which I'm assuming is pretty straightforward given the sign up route. Oh, okay, good. Let me share the stats. 80% is good, 13% is fast, and 8% is slow, which is fine because we have half an hour after the class. Let's quickly create the sign in route as well, which, this is the sign in route. So this was a sign up route with JWT. this is the sign in route with JWT. Let me quickly, that makes a lot of sense. This was a sign in route, which is why I had if check over here. We find if the user exists. If the user exists, we return that back to the user, else we don't. Also, there's password missing over here, so slightly buggy, but let me copy it over. The sign in route looks something like this. We again initialize Prisma. We again get back the body. We expect the user to give us what? We expect the user to give us email and password. And then we check, find a user with this email and password. And if a user does not exist, we tell the end user that you do not exist, or the credentials are incorrect. But if they do exist, then we sign the JWT for the user and return it to them. So the second endpoint is hopefully pretty straightforward. Again, I'm adding these TS ignores everywhere. You shouldn't. You should initialize Hono correctly. It doesn't matter for now, as long as you're at least writing some code and reaching some point. The sign-in endpoint, I'm assuming, is fairly straightforward and not too complicated to write yourself either. But let me do a quick poll to make sure that is the case. Was this good? Was this easy? Yes or no? Okay, mostly good, right? Okay, 86%. Great. Cool. We have 8 more minutes before I want to pause for doubts. So let me quickly take you through middlewares as well, because that you have until tomorrow to recap a bit, understand this yourself before tomorrow's live class. So next up, we need middlewares, right? Before we actually create the blog endpoint that lets the user get a blog, post a blog, put a blog. Maybe not get might be open to everyone, but for posting and creating a new blog or updating a new blog, an existing blog, we need to add a middleware that can extract the details of a user. We've done this a few times. We did this in Mongo, our original Mongo stack. And you probably want to do this here as well. You probably want to create a separate middleware that does all the authentication checks. So the way you can do that is there are a few ways. Basically, you can read through these guides over here, hono.dev/guide/middleware. The cleanest one I found was, we are going to, this is just a hint, if you want to add a route, a middleware on some specific routes, you can use this syntax. You can be like, any request that comes to /messages/*, that specific request should run through this middleware. What is a middleware, Hakira? Something that runs before a request, and only if next is called does the actual handler get called. That's what a middleware is. We've discussed this a few times. And specifically, we want whenever either this or this or this, whenever either of these requests run, before control reaches here, it should run through a middleware. So you can initialize your middleware like this. You can be like app.use /API/v1/blog/*. This middleware should run first. First, we need to do all the authentication checks over here, make sure things are good, and only then should the control reach here, here, and here. If there is some error over here, then we should block the request and tell the user, okay, something is wrong. So this is how I have initialized a middleware. You can do it a different way. You can have a function, you can individually give middlewares over here, that works as well. But since Hono provides you a clean way to initialize middlewares given a prefix, this is the syntax that I would use. I'm going to copy this and paste it at the top. Anytime a request is going here, before it reaches that specific route, what do we need to do? We need to get the header. We need to verify the header. If the header is correct, we can proceed. If not, we tell the user 403. We return the user a 403 status code. Do we understand this? I have not written the logic, but do we understand what this middleware is doing and why it is needed for all the blogging endpoints? Because those endpoints need to be protected. Are we good to go? Alright, pretty good. So writing the logic here is, I'm hoping, pretty straightforward. I'm going to import verify from Hono/DWT, and I'm going to verify const response equal to verify the header, which this looks wrong. I think the way to get a header in Hono is this. Let's see. Const header equal to c dot, here that looks right, and then c dot verify header comma JWT secret. Again, a bunch of TypeScript errors over here. You shouldn't, I repeat, shouldn't TS ignore this. I am doing it because we did not have the right generic over here, but ideally you should have the right type over here. Get the response. I think this needs to be awaited as well. Yeah, await, and if response dot id, because that's what we signed the JWT with, right? We signed the JWT with an ID, which means we will get back a response.id. If response.id does exist, then we can call next, else we can return to the user c.status 403 and then return them unauthorized. Yeah, that's how I would write the middleware. Let's look at it from the top. First, extract the header. Now here, what matters is the format of the header. Are you expecting the user to give you something like this, bearer space the token, or are you expecting the user to give you just the token? Usually, we've seen this before as well. Okay, the way we expect the user to give us a token in the authorization header is bearer space the actual token, which is why you might want to, extract the final token. We've done this a few times of how you can get it. Const token equal to header dot split space 1, which means split this into two parts, convert this into bearer comma token, and then get the first value from here, which is the actual token. So if you expect the user, okay, whenever they're sending you the request in, let's say, Postman, if you expect them to give the authorization header as bearer space the actual token, then you write this logic. If you expect the end user to simply give you the token, then you don't have to write this logic. Then you can simply be like, verify the header. Usually what do? We expect the user to give us bearer space the token, which means this token is what should get verified. You should get the actual token, which is this thing right here, from the big authorization header that the user gives you. Do you understand this? Do you understand the middleware that we've created? We've not used the middleware at all yet, but do we understand how to write the middleware? Not a lot of people. 83%. Cool. Either way, we're at time here. We've been able to reach slide number 6, which means there's a lot to cover. This also tells me that I think we'll only be able to do the backend this weekend, which means front end, which anyways is fairly simple stuff, will come as an offline video. We've covered until middleware. Tomorrow we will try to write the blog routes. Feel free to run ahead of the class and practice this a bit. After you write the blog routes, then we'll test them in Postman. We'll understand how to deploy our application. We'll do some Zod validation. We'll do some NPM. Basically a bunch of stuff. Okay, cool. Let me tell you, whatever we're doing, we've covered many times, which means there's either lack of practice on your side, or there's you've not looked at the videos at all. Either way, don't get too overwhelmed because you've not done a lot of these things. And I'm assuming if you've done all the classes until now, then this was a piece of cake, and you were in the lot that felt that the class was a little too slow. All right. Either way, we will continue on this. We will do this tomorrow as well. I'm going to open chat for any doubts for this class. From the beginning, let me quickly recap one more time. We're building a Medium application. This was the stack. We initialized the backend. If you want, after the class, try to go through step 1 to 6 again and try to code it yourself. All the instructions are mentioned pretty well here. Specifically, things like these. Try to understand all the callouts that I've given are sort of insightful to know, good to know, probably things you should have in your application. So, try to read through all the links that I've given. I say over here you should hash your passwords, try to write that code yourself. Although if you're really slow today, then maybe don't worry about these extra callouts. Yeah, so initialize the backend, simple Hono application. Initialize the routes, completely empty routes. Initialize the database, which I'm assuming boggled most of your heads because a few people were not able to initialize it. A few people have not gone through Prisma. A few people have gone through Prisma, but haven't gone through the video where I discussed Prisma with serverless, which is why this is where I saw most of the drop off of people. And then just creating routes, which was fairly straightforward. This is where the logic building began, where we actually wrote the route to actually return the JWT to the user, and in the sign up route as well. And then here is where we initialized a simple middleware. This was the final solution. App.use, get the token, extract the final token from it, the second part, and then verify whether or not this token is correct. And then if it isn't correct, return the user 403, else. This part also is something we'll discuss tomorrow. Yeah, I'll discuss this tomorrow, but basically in the end, whenever you're creating a middleware, you need to extract the user ID and give it to the next route, right? So the route knows this is the user that's trying to create a post. That's how you can do this. Feel free to read through this, but I'll take you through this tomorrow as well. That's all for today. An opening chat for any questions. Let me just 1 second. All right. Any first questions related to the class, and then I'm happy to take other questions as well. All right, a lot of questions. Cool. Let's start from the bottom. Is the 0 to 1 cohort? If this is 0 to 1 cohort, do you think 12 weeks we can absorb all the things we have studied so far for best version of ourselves? Aren't we going too fast? What will happen in 1 to 100 then? So the good thing is 1 to 100 is very high level TC. You don't write a lot of code in 1 to 100 because a lot of system design. That said, is this too much for 12 weeks? Probably, could be, which is why happy to take offline videos, discuss this again. Today we were supposed to start next year, so I did not because I wanted to practice everything. So it could be, but the good thing is you have access for 3 years, so you can pick and choose. Bhaiya raised 2 nice PRs in processing, but this time it did not come to GSOC, which is very surprising. Processing has been coming for years, so it's very surprising it did not come this year. Should I go with some other organization? I mean, that's the only choice you have. Too much. Okay. Okay, let me ask one question here, which I already never mind. So basically, we did a poll, and only like 25% of people are at week 12, which pretty much might be one of the reasons this class was overwhelming. Either way, happy to do more classes. I'm here. Happy to extend the course. Don't even worry about it. Post the gist of your code in so all the code is present already here. github.com/100x devs cohort 2/week 13. The final application is present here, so you can read through this. Off topic, but still related somehow. I was trying to set up CMS locally, and then after CD migrations, seed SQL, I'm getting error PSQL command not found. Well, the answer is in your question, my friend. You don't have PSQL installed locally. Install PSQL, which usually comes bundled with Postgres. So you'll have to install Postgres on your machine basically, and then it'll work. Is Prisma kind of a load balancer? No. Very, very different. Prisma is what's called an ORM. A load balancer and an ORM are significantly different things. Let me quickly explain what those are. But they're very different. If this is your server in AWS, so like an AWS machine, another AWS machine, you put a load balancer in front so that when your user hits your application, you hit the load balancer, and as the name suggests, it balances load between multiple nodes. That's what a load balancer is. Prisma or an ORM is something significantly different. If this is your database, and this is your Node.js application, an ORM lets you connect to the database easily, and that's basically this is where the ORM exists, and the load balancer is someplace else. So significantly different. And what does an ORM let you do? It basically makes it easier for you to connect to the database and run commands. Neon Tech gives a different URI for pooled connections. Does it have to be its own connection? Oh, yeah, doesn't matter. You can use that. Can you use that? You most probably will not be able to use that. So if you go to Neon Tech, it does give you a pooled connection. That will work with Vercel. That might not. I repeat, might not work direct. So let me open a random URL here. So yeah, it gives you, if you look here, it gives you an option for a pooled connection. This does work in Vercel. This might not work in Prisma because okay, so if this is Prisma, okay, what's the best way to explain this? When you generate the client, right, when you run npm, let me try to explain this as best as I can, but npx Prisma, when you run npx Prisma generate, it generates a client for you, which has, you know, a bunch of things. A lot of these things that it generates for you does not, I repeat, it does not work in NOT, does not work in the Cloudflare environment, which is why when you use a connection pool of Prisma, I repeat, you use the connection pool of Prisma, there's a bunch of this code and you use, you know, no engine flag here. There's a bunch of the code that should have been present here but is present in this connection pool, which is why I am guessing this connection pool, even if you select this connection pool, it will not work with Prisma. It will work generally, by which I mean, you know, if you are using a, okay, this is a better way to put it. If you are using, let me write this down. If you are using a Node.js based edge environment, then the pooled connection will work fine with what do you call it, Neon DB pool URL. If you are using a different Node.js runtime or whatever JS runtime similar to AWS Lambda or Cloudflare workers, is when the neon.tech pooled con might not work. Why? Because the pooled connection that you get from neon.db does not have a bunch of Prisma dependencies that the Prisma pooled connection does. Okay, this is the best way I can write this, and this last line is sort of where the meat of the reason why the Neon Tech URL might not work. Again, I'm saying might not work. It might work. My guess is it might not. It might. I don't know. I'm very confused whether or not it will work. We can actually try it, so it doesn't really matter. But my guess is, and this guess comes from, you know, when I was going through Prisma with edge environments, this specific you know doc right here. If your application is deployed on an edge, serverless offering. When I was going through this serverless / AWS Lambda is when I read, okay, you know, okay, if you read through this, here you will read, okay, there are a bunch of binaries that come built in with, I'm confusing you too much, right? Am I confusing you too much? Am I not do you remotely understand what I'm saying? Yes or no? Oh my god, the options are incorrect. Try that one more time. Do you remotely understand what I'm saying? Yes or no? And the answer is probably no. Say no. No. Yeah. 50-50. Okay. Cool. You don't have to know, like, understand. This is a very deep question. The question basically was, let me quickly recap the question and recap my answer, but you don't have to understand this. It's fine if you don't understand this. I got a little too much into details. The answer to this lies here in deployed to AWS, or at least this is where I'm guessing my answer from. The question was, okay, if you go to neon.tech, neon.tech has its own, pooled connections. If I go to any one of these URLs, along with this normal URL, it gives me a pooled URL as well. So the question was, here, isn't this enough? Why do I have to get the accelerate URL that this guy provides us? And I think the answer is, this is not enough. Why? Because this accelerate URL that you get, right, it has a few things that Prisma needs. Basically, Prisma has sort of made sure, pooled connections don't work from other providers. I could be wrong on that, but my guess is based on what I read through this document, it will not work with this specific pooled connection. You have to get a pooled connection from this Prisma page. Alright, cool. Right, long answer to that question. Someone says you're getting a 404 XMAC key. Are you importing some library that does not run in this runtime? Adnan Hussain, I think it seems like looking at your code, looking at your exception. There is a specific library that you're importing. That does not work in the Cloudflare environment. I understand everything because it looks simple, Express backend, besides it's just variable names changed, but I was behind because of slow typing. Okay, makes sense. Facing this issue, let's see. Not able to hit the route using Postman. Let's see. Are you, oh, it does, wait. Not able to hit the route using Postman. You are right, you are getting back a response. What makes you think you're not able to hit Postman? It seems like you're getting back a response. You're getting back a 200 status code. Seems like you are able to hit Postman. Yeah, let me know if not, but like pretty clearly you're able to hit Postman here. How to organize middlewares is a good question. The answer resides, there's a bunch of alpha. I mean, if you really want to read through it, and the reason you should read through it because this Hono and Next.js are becoming the popular ways to write backend. Now Express is slowly becoming very archaic. So this might become the popular library to write backends eventually. So you can read through this. There's this middleware section over here. There's also there's a middleware section here as well. Basically, this won't answer your question, but a lot of your questions will be answered here as to how you can structure middlewares and define them in different files. Yeah. How too many awaits will make your app slow. Any solution? It's not in your hand to await a function or not. So if it makes it slow, it does make it slow. It is an asynchronous call, right? So you can't really do anything about it. If there is a database call that's happening, it needs to be asynchronous. You need to await on it. If there are too many asynchronous calls, if there need to be too many asynchronous calls, you can't do anything to decrease that number, unfortunately, because that's what your application needs. If your application needs to connect to a database, it needs to connect to a database. Next.js will probably start next week, along with like 1-200 folks. Show to organize middlewares. Few people are asking this. What do you mean by organize middlewares? You mean how do you define them in different files? Is that what you mean? There's like a lot of things you can do to. Where is all the code? To like organize your files better here. I've shoved everything in a single file. If you want to organize your middlewares, number one, here's the dumbest thing you can do. This app.use, you can define in a separate file. So middleware.ts, init middlewares app export function init middleware app. Yeah, this is the dumbest thing you can do. Oh, can you do that? Yeah, you can do that. The only problem you will face, as you can see, is the types are very incorrect. So you need to figure out what the type of this app is. It's something like this Hono, env, whatever that specific type is. That is why defining it here, and you'll find this answer here as well in their document. I read this yesterday. Okay, they suggest you should write your handlers like this comma like this, rather than having like a separate controller, handler that's defined somewhere else, because it will be very hard for you to figure out this type of C and what it should be. So if you read through somewhere here, the research controllers, so the whole controller, I can't find it, but like the whole MVC pattern, okay, you should use, you have a controller route handler. Hono doesn't suggest that. Hono suggests, okay, you actually write code like this. You have a inline handler rather than having a separate function. The reason for which is, if you define a separate handler, the type of this context becomes very, unless you're using any, becomes very hard to figure out, which is why they suggest this, which is why I shoved everything in a single file. Here is the dumbest way for you to, structure middlewares, but if need be, happy to structure this file into, routes and then user.ts and blogs.ts and, put files in there. It shouldn't be too difficult to figure out how to structure your application. Happy to do it tomorrow. But yeah, I need code base because I'm not able to set database in Prisma. I need code base. Oh, the code base exists here. Week 13. So you just go here and you can get it from here. Please check this out. How to use express.router in Hono. Oh, you cannot. Express.router is a routing library in Express, so you cannot use it in Hono. Gain real experience. Those tasks. Looks pretty good. Error while evaluating SSR module at Prisma client edge. Module is not defined. Have you installed this specific library at Prisma/extension accelerate? And did you run, whenever you're generating the client, did you run -- no engine? This probably might be why you might be thinking so. To get the environment variable outside, we can do this using app.use with a c.set and c.get. But if I'm using $exchange with accelerate, it gives a type error on c.set. Not sure what the error is. Okay, someone figured out a way to describe the environment variable outside. Let's see what it is. Type environment equal to this, Hono of environment. And then app.use star Prisma client c.set. You're setting this might be a decent way to why is this okay? That's probably because this needs to be a string. Can the context, so this is what the person's testing. Kirat, if you need access to Prisma, you can just store it in the context. You can be like, anytime a request comes, you initialize a Prisma client and then you set it in the context, but they said I'm getting a type error. It probably is because, the set needs to be done, whatever you can only set context on, certain types, a number, a string or something like that. And you're setting it, on a more complex object. Is probably not it though. It's giving you some different. String is not similar type, never. Oh yeah, you have to do this. Oh, you have done this. Prisma client. Okay, let's see, string. Yeah, it does work, right? Yeah, so here's my guess. The type of your variable that you're defining is Prisma client, but you cannot have, the second argument here cannot be Prisma client. It actually might just be. What is the type of this? Okay, let's see. There you go. So the way to the type of this Prisma variable might not be Prisma client, which is why you're seeing the error. This also seems like a decent way to, not reinitialize Prisma again and again here and just set it in the context. Yeah, this looks it works. It's still not outside though. It's still not in the global context. You still have it inside, an app.use. The question was, can you get access to environment variables here globally? And the answer I still feel is no, could be wrong. And yeah, but this is like a decent way to, have a global middleware that catches all the requests, initializes Prisma, and sets it in the context. And then you can just use it here. The only problem you have is a type error. The reason that's happening is because the type of this Prisma client might not be this Prisma client. You might have to add in a generic for, with accelerate or something else. Yeah, that's the only thing you need to figure out. What's the type of this thing? How do I know that works? If I replace this with any, the type error goes away. Does AWS Lambda also require separate connection pool? Yes. If you're using Lambda also, you should have a connection pool. Over there, you might not need, you might not be forced to only, have this specific connection pool URL. You might be able to use the Neon Tech connection pool URL as well. Only when you're in the Cloudflare worker environment is when I think you'll be forced to use this specific Prisma URL. Why are we returning JWT in both sign up and sign in? In sign in, we should just use JWT. Can you explain again? And why would we use that SQL in Wrangler.toml? Can you explain overall flow? Okay, let me start from your first question. Why are we returning JWT in both sign up and sign in? When you go to any website, let's say you go to facebook.com, most websites, what they do is when you sign up for the first time, most websites will, send you a verification email. You will click on the email and eventually log in. But we're creating a very rudimentary website, which is why we are saying whenever the user signs up, immediately they go to their blogs page, which is why we're returning the token to them in the sign up request as well, and not just the sign in request. Second question is, in the sign in route, we would just use JWT. Can you explain again? So both the sign up and the sign in route, and this probably means you've not done the original classes, but we've done JWTs many times right now, right? Anytime you sign up or sign in, anytime a user signs up or signs in, we return them back a token, which is why we're doing it both on sign up and sign in. You don't do it in sign up in big websites, in real websites, in facebook.com. We're doing it here because we don't have, fancy checks like sending a user an email and then verifying user email, so on and so forth. And why are we using direct Postgres SQL in Wrangler.toml? In Wrangler.toml, we are not using direct Postgres URL. In Wrangler.toml, we have the Prisma Accelerate URL. In .env is where we have the direct URL. Why? We have the direct URL here because whenever we run a command like Prisma generate, migrate, commands like these that actually hit your database and do the migrations, you cannot put a Prisma URL here. And your CLI picks up the environment variable from here. Your application index.ts picks up the environment variable from Wrangler.toml. You will have to, whatever I said in the last 20 seconds, you have to, repeat a few times if you did not understand this the first time, but your answer is in those 20 seconds of what I've said before. Join late, please upload the recording as soon as possible. We'll try that. My DB updates, but after it I get a 403 on sign up. Are you, oh sorry, I don't have the code here, but if you're getting 403 on sign up, it probably means the user already exists in the email. Try to change the email over here and then send the request and then see if you get back a token or not. You're probably sending the request again and again for the same user, and our logic states, if you get the same email twice, Prisma request will fail and you return the 403 to the user. Why not use a middleware for Prisma? The same thing that someone suggested, this thing right here. Sure, I mean, yeah, works. Probably, yeah, looks pretty clean. Yeah, no reason for me to think that you shouldn't do it. We should do it. The only reason I can think of is we have an NE over here, which we can easily figure out what the type of that should be. Facing this issue, answered that. Cannot verify function. Cannot find verify function. Are you importing it from the right place? It needs to be imported from hono/jwt. It does have a verify function, so make sure you're importing it from hono/jwt. I can understand everything because it looks simple like Express backend. Besides this variable name change, that is correct. Got it. Prisma extension is not giving me any suggestions. Prisma extension is not giving any. Prisma extension in VS Code is not for giving suggestions. It's for color coding over here. Already done with these in week 11 assignments. Will you do many-to-many relationships? I wanted to add tags over here as a many-to-many relationship, but we will see. I think there's a lot to cover before that. I probably will cover it in an offline video for sure, but like people will eventually slowly understand it. But yeah, I created a Next.js project, but for getting this log in a Vercel logs, okay, I'm also getting the size of response between 4 MB. But I created a next project, but getting this error in the Vercel logs. Okay, let's see. Basically means your Lambda runtime failed, post handler success response, status code 413, content too large. Basically means whatever you're trying to send back from your backend is very big for Vercel, and Vercel is just ignoring your error, ignoring your response and telling you the response is too big. So inspect the response and see what you're returning. Are you returning a very big thing? And if yes, that might be the problem, and then you'll have to figure out how to get over it, that specific size limitation in Vercel. Okay, a few people are saying recap. I've recapped a few times. I'll upload the video, you'll find it there. I've recapped this with much more patience before, so you might want to go through the recap after I upload the video. Cannot find .prisma client edge. If you're not able to find Prisma client edge, you might not have generated the client with the no engine flag, or you might not have installed @prisma/extension accelerate. One of these two, either this command or most probably this command, gives you Prisma/client/edge. There's some projects on storage protocols. What do you mean storage protocol? Like Web3 source protocols? The standard create decentralized AWS, whatever, S3. Fang US is still asking DSA and dev roles. Not all are focusing on the niche, which they are good at, but at the end, clearing DSA rounds, we finally move software development. And what's the use of DSA? It's just the filtering criteria on companies, as you said. A request to add FireOS in 1.2 syllabus, we'll see. There's a lot to cover before that. How to use API. Give a high level of them and then integrate them in our own website. Example, Rapid API. Is there a question here? A video on how to build betting websites. How to dynamically change the ratios on every second. Okay, and I have to. What do you mean dynamically change ratios? I don't do a lot of betting, but I'll see this after the class. I want to make a poker-like website. Does that cover all the use cases that you need? Why can't we use SQL joins in Prisma? Why are we using it? Why can't do SQL joins in Prisma? Then why are we using it? Issue with Prisma. I recently read an article which says not to use Prisma because it doesn't have a concept of SQL joins, and it also ships multiple engines. When you deploy it on the cloud, which increases the deployment size up to 50 MB on AWS Lambda. I would like to know your views on it. So it is true that Prisma does not let you do joins, or whenever you try to, even if you've connected data together, it is not doing joins, it's doing something called subqueries. That's not the worst thing in the world. If you don't, a lot of times joins are actually slower. I think that's why they've made this conscious decision of not doing joins and doing subqueries. It doesn't matter for the longest time. If you do want ownership of your own queries and want to do joins at some point, then yes, Prisma might not be an option, or Prisma might, I'm sure, provide you a way to enforce doing joins. To answer the other question, yes. The whole mumbo jumbo I was talking about today, right? You have an engine, and then when you're deploying to AWS, you don't have. When you're deploying to Cloudflare workers, you don't have that engine, and then you have to use the Accelerate offering where they've actually deployed the engine. I didn't know it was a problem in Prisma. People are so vocal about it, but I could totally see it being a problem when I was going through, how Prisma is deployed on AWS Lambda. People will say a lot of things. Every framework gets its own fair share of hate. In the end, it really depends on what companies are using, because eventually you're going to be contributing to companies. And if there is an issue with Prisma, And if a company feels that is the case and they go to a different ORM or do it raw, then it makes sense. For us, the goal is, since most projects are using Prisma, we understand it. That said, my views on this are, both of these are problems you won't see until you hit a certain scale, which is why I also read about this problem yesterday. Their engines are very bloated, or the reason I read about or figured out they don't do joins is because I logged their SQL queries and saw why are they not doing joins when you're creating relationships. I don't necessarily think it's a problem, but a lot of these are like problems that come at scale and people come out with blog posts like these. So yeah, that's my high level. Let's complete the entire thing and not extend this session because I do not take no for an answer. Also, using Hono, if you use the fast mode environment variable, then we can achieve more speed in the backend application. What's the fast mode environment variable in Hono? Let's see. Page not found. Can you point me to a blog post on this fast mode environment variable? I am getting an error that body.email doesn't exist. I know it's a TypeScript issue, but how do I come to know that? How you don't see this error? Let's see. I think body becomes, at least what I felt, that the type of this is any. Yeah. And when you have an any type, you can access body.email. Here is what might be happening for you. Your TS config might be very strict. No implicit. Why would you see? Can you hover over this body and see what the type of body is? And if it is any for you, then you probably have something in your TS config that is, making you give a red squiggly here or converting this into an error. But usually this is the type of this is any. Then body.email should not give you an error. For you, the type of this might not be any. There might be a few reasons for it. Number one, you might not have put an await over here. A few people did that. If you're putting an await over here and the body of this is any, then you shouldn't see an error. But if you have put an await over here, but the type of this is something else, then something else. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let me open chat one more time. A lot of questions have gone up and down, so feel free to post your question again. Okay, let me start from the top. Someone had explained connection pooling again. There's a video I posted yesterday, so you can just look at that video. Covers this in more detail. Brother, I'm not able to access the variables from Wrangler.toml5 if I put it in a static in JS and then it works. It says Cloudflare module workers environment variables are available only in worker environment. Bro, I'm not able to access environment variables from Wrangler.toml5 if I put it in static index.js and then it works. Can you share a Notion doc of what you mean? It works in a static index.js. Can you share your code? Can you help me reproduce this locally? I don't understand your setup and like what file it works in, what file does not work in very well. Connection pooling, go to the video from yesterday. In Paytm project, I'm getting transaction successful in the code in write and it is same as yours, but the changes are not reflecting in the database. That sounds wrong. If you're creating a transaction, if the transaction isn't reverting, you should see in the database. You see the change in the database. What makes you think that the transaction is succeeding? Are you checking the final response of the final mongoose dot commit or whatever the final function call over there is? Because if the transaction succeeds, you should see the balances change. Do we need a JWT secret in Wrangler.toml? Yeah, you probably do. If you're going to access c.env.jwt secret, then this JWT secret needs to be in Wrangler.toml right here. Want to focus, bhaiya. I want to focus in depth on one technology. Will you use Hono in upcoming projects or Express? Good question. We can do Express. I mean, we'll be introducing Next.js very soon. And that has its own way to do backend, although Now I'll be a little cautious on how quickly I introduce these things. Will we use Hono in this project? Yes. In future projects, probably not. In the future projects, we'll probably use Next.js, both for front end and back end. Change the internet connection, still not able to migrate. Even don't see AWS account or any other way to migrate for tomorrow. How else can you migrate? You can send me your credentials, or send a friend your credentials and have them migrate for you. So push your code to GitHub, ask your friend to clone it, give your friend your database credentials and ask them to migrate. It's the only other way I can think of doing it, or rent an AWS machine and do it there. I have found one issue in MetaMask and found the cause for it too, and posted it in comment over there on GitHub. Very cool. Explain something error. While hitting the endpoint from Postman, it shows this thing for the forbidden. I don't have access to this Notion doc. Does promise.all will bring some efficiency if we have lots of await DB calls? Yes. So depends how you're doing async calls. So let's say you are doing one call after the other. So what is happening here? You're first creating a user and then you're again creating the user. First this will happen, let's say, for 2 seconds, and then this will happen for 2 seconds. That's how things work sequentially. So you're doing 2 sequential calls. If you do this, await promise.all, this thing, comma, this thing, then both of these requests will basically go out in parallel. This database request and this database request will both go out parallelly. If this takes 2 seconds and this takes 2 seconds, now the whole thing takes only 2 seconds. But when you had them sequentially, then it would have taken 4 seconds. That is why promise.all makes sense if you're doing multiple parallel requests and you don't need, the second request does not depend on the first one. Then you can, parallelize them. That's what the promise.all over here lets you do, compared to, first sequentially awaiting this and sequentially awaiting this. Cool. I have found one issue in, okay, answer that. Off topic question. Can you explain which is the best place to host React applications for front end and back end both? React application front end, whatever is the cheapest CDN you can find. S3 plus Cloudflare is pretty cheap. Backend is a good question. If you're using a serverless backend, wherever the serverless app backend is deployed, Cloudflare, Firebase, whatever you're using, pretty cheap initially. If you have an Express application, then again, if you're expecting a lot of scale, then maybe AWS has, if the simplest solution is something called auto-scaling groups in AWS that go up and down. But if it's like a simple application, no one's going to use it, then a $10 machine anywhere, it doesn't matter. The cheapest VM that you can find and deploy it there. Should I just upload to Vercel or Netlify and custom domains for GoDaddy.com? So Vercel or Netlify will work until they become very expensive. So our website, app.100xapps.com, the bill for this one for this month came out around $720, which is a lot of money for a website which less than 1,000 people are hitting every day. So AWS we migrated the website to AWS as well for the same reason. So Vercel and Netlify, as fancy as it sounds initially, becomes very expensive very quickly. So even for this website, which not a lot of people are hitting, it's an internal website only for people who have paid. If that website can bill you like 50,000 rupees in a month, is when there's a problem in these providers, and you probably wanna own your thing, by which I mean deploy it on AWS. Don't rely too much on Vercel or Netlify. All right. In the JWT logic, I would urge you to go back to the original video. If you want me to recap, let me recap. The JWT logic basically says, whenever you initialize a route, specifically the sign up and sign in routes, you encode the user's ID in a token, and that's what a JWT is. We have a detailed video on JWT where I explain how it's different from how it does not hash your password, does not encrypt your password. Anyone can look at the JWT and figure out your user ID. So it's very hard for me to explain in 2 minutes. Basically, we have detailed videos. We've done this a few times initially. I would urge you to go through those videos where we discuss how this JWT method of creating tokens is a better. It's like one way to do authentication. So yeah. I saw this. There's a certificate thingy, right? No. Collaborate. Oh, it's pretty good. Wait, I cannot write. Okay, there you go. Is this collaborative considering the name has collaborate in it? Yes, it is. Where's the code? Does it use operational transforms? Does it sync? It does sync pretty well. Pretty good. Is the code open source? It looks pretty good. But I'm curious to see, how have you implemented collaboration? User equal to this thing, token equal to this thing, returns this thing. JWT is empty. And that is because you are not awaiting sign Advait. So, your code is incorrect because you're writing this and you need to await the sign function. When you await it, you'll be fine. Is there a different service in AWS for connection pooling? Can you make a video on hackathons, how to approach, how to get ideas, what to build for people who have not done hackathons before? I don't know if it's video worthy, but the high level is if you're in a hackathon, you have to impress them very quickly. Tech does not matter. You have to bring something up very quickly. If it's a little fancy, it's cool. If it solves, some environment, government thingy, it's usually preferred. Really depends on the hackathon. That's my 2 cents. Is there something in AWS for connection pooling? I don't know. AWS database connection pools. Connection management, doesn't seem like they have a service unless it's for RDS. Solving some issues. Don't think they have a dedicated service. At least I haven't heard of it. I would have heard of it if it's AWS had a service like this. Seems like they don't. Could be wrong. Where can I find sign up user in Avian? Oh, download PG admin. It's a UI for Postgres. You can see it there. Unable to remember which things I practiced and get overwhelmed and need to see previous tutorials again and again. How to overcome this? Few people are saying this. Seems like there is a need for more practice on simpler things. Seems like, we've done a lot of things too fast, or like whatever, a lot of difficult things fast. And by fast I mean, in less number of weeks. So the solution here might be, doing more classes on simpler stuff. I think that's, sorry, already sleepy. I think that's one solution here. Doing a lot of, HTML class, CSS class, JavaScript class, because my guess from, a lot of this like today's class has been, not a lot of people are able to catch up to week 12. Even we did a poll where we realized, 25% are able to stay at pace and 75% are, behind by a lot. So yeah, my guess here is a lot of practice on simpler stuff is going to help overcome this. Seems like we've introduced a lot of difficult things very quickly, which is that people are like, don't understand, not able to do it. Yeah. Please now to choose a better joins. Oh, seems like there's a choose the best join strategy. Support for database level joins has been one of the most requested features in Prisma ORM. For any relation query, include set solution. I'm hoping this is implemented without breaking it. I would like to see a single query executed and join multiple. Oh, there you go. So there is a way for you to do joins in Prisma now. Seems like they heard people and fixed, or at least provided a fix. And there you go. You can specify the strategy, which now you can specify as join as well. It sounds pretty good. You should try this out locally. Have this specific relation load strategy and then log the SQL query and see if it actually, uses a subquery or it uses a join. Cool. Let's see. Any more questions, guys? This way I'm able to sign in. Okay, if you hard code the URL here, this way it does not work. Have you created? Oh, Wrangler Toml is there. Okay. You have not uncommented vars over here. Remove the hash, remove the space before vars, delete this line, and then it will work for you. Your vars that you have environment variables below this is commented. What if I want to specify the middleware for some routes and not for other routes? I want to specify middleware. So for that question, the answer is, don't use the app.use routes that I showed you. Define the middleware separately. C, next, and then use that middleware whenever you want to. Like whatever route you want to use the middleware on, put the middleware here. Just like we did in Express. Other question I have is how to encrypt password in Hono, and why does every time port change when we are running? I don't know why the port changes locally. I'm pretty irritated by that as well. Okay, whenever you're running npm run dev, it just changes the port for you. Just something Cloudflare Workers do for you. Password in Cloudflare Workers, I think I've linked a post here somewhere where I introduced it. So you can go through that. Let's see. Here, web crypto. You can use this library to create a hash for the password and store this hash in the database. I reached this blog post through this community post where someone was asking how do you options for password hashing, which is something that you're asking as well. So just read through this. There's always someone who's answered the question that you have. How to add user ID in the request object middleware? In JSV, you should, so exactly, you should do record.user ID. Here you do if you look at our solution, the thing we have done is added it to the context variable. So we do if you look at the middleware, right here, we do a c.set. So rather than doing a rec.user ID, we do a c.set user ID pair.id, which means we set something on the context, and then whatever the next endpoint is can do a c.get user ID to get that value. It's probably the easier way to do it, that you don't doing a c.user ID equal to something, because this is type safe. What you are saying, I can do a c.user ID equal to something and then get access to it in the next route, but that won't be type safe, by which I mean, TypeScript will complain. And if you do this, TypeScript won't complain as long as you've done what's mentioned in this specific point over here. So go through this point, goes to this point, it has the answer to your question. Step 4, instruction says that Wrangler.toml should have a dev/local db URL. So you should only use prod URL in .env. Don't we need to do a migration for prod db as well? Can you explain this bit? Which environment URL should go in? Yeah, so good question. The thing is, this Wrangler.toml file, this you commit to GitHub. I repeat, you send this file over to GitHub, which is why you should not have your prod db URL here. .env is something usually you don't commit to GitHub, which is why you can have your prod URL here locally. Ideally, you should not. You should perform migrations through a CI/CD pipeline. The migration should not happen from a developer's database locally. How many of you heard about the recent production issue? These guys, YC-backed company that had a security incident recently, where a developer like you and I locally ran npx prisma migrate or something like that, and the developer locally had access to the production database URL like this, and ended up running a command that deleted the database. So you should never, developers should never have access to this prod naked URL locally. It should be present somewhere else in some server which actually performs the migration. So that's the high level of .env where you should put what. Locally does not matter as long as you're not committing things to GitHub. You're fine. So even if you have access to the production database, you can put it here because this file is not committed to GitHub. Wrangler.toml is committed to GitHub. So here you should have a dummy URL, local URL. Then Harkita, there is a dummy local URL here. How will it finally work on Cloudflare? How will Cloudflare know my database URL? You can set that in the UI. We will do that when we reach, slide 12 or slide 13 tomorrow. You can set these environment variables directly in the Cloudflare dashboard, and that's how you shouldn't have the naked URLs here. The response in transaction successful, tried logging everything. Oh, the response is tried logging everything, working fine, but the database is not reflecting the change. भाई कई दिनों से ऐसी पे फंसा हुआ हूँ. And Firebase and Cloudflare both serverless functions, or are they other differences and serverless functions and good for not good for much of a website? Yeah, so Cloudflare and serverless, Firebase are separate offerings which both let you create serverless functions. Both are usually not good for scale because they are very expensive. To answer your first question, I will have to look at the code. So push your code somewhere, send it to me, or send it to a TA. They'll tell you what's wrong. I'm sure there's something very simple over there. If I had to guess, your queries are incorrect. I'm sure they aren't. I'm sure you've checked this 10 times. So just give me the code and I'll be able to figure it out. I'll have to look at the code. Doubts. Please explain about the, okay, answered that. Please explain the .env in context of serverless. Like in local express application, we have .env file in process object in a single node process. How does that work in a serverless cloud? So this is something specific to Cloudflare. Okay, Cloudflare does not pick your environment variables from a .env file. It picks it from wrangler.toml. So here is where you have to define all your environment variables under this was statement. So that's something specific to Cloudflare. If you're using a simple express application, if you're creating even an AWS serverless offering or Lambda offering, over there you can pick environment variables from .env. Here though, Cloudflare strictly picks the environment variables from your wrangler.toml file. What do you mean when you say express is obsolete now? Yeah, too bold of a statement for me to say express is obsolete. I basically mean people are running behind fancy JavaScript runtimes today. AWS introduced something called LLRT, if you've heard of it. Cloudflare has its own runtime. So everyone, Fastify offering, if you've heard of it. There's another one, I'm forgetting the name now. Fast API, Strap API. People are sort of deferring a lot of deployment, and they don't want to worry about deployment, which is why they're using these services like heavily reliant on serverless offerings. And for a lot of these don't support Express, which is why, for example, Cloudflare does not support Express, which is why I said it's becoming archaic. It's too bold of a statement for me to say. It's not becoming archaic, but at the same time, you'll see projects not use them very often because most people are doing backend on Next. Including like our website. Look at any popular open source code base. If they have Next as a front end, they're using Next for the backend. So that's what I meant when I said it's becoming slightly archaic. Then how do backend logic is being written in J/T's? Then how heavy backend logic is being written in J's/T's? What is J's/T's? Has J's/T's not highly performance? Oh, J's/T's. Okay. I mean, it is being written backend or it is being written in Next.js. That's the high level. It is being written. It's not like Express. There's a long way to go before Express becomes archaic. As JS/T is not high performance language, is it being used beyond early stage startups? It is. So there are reasons for it. The base reason is very easy to hire talent. Every big company was a small company at some point, unless you become uber big, like as big as Uber. Uber made the transition from Node.js to Golang. Unless you become that big, it's not as problematic to stick to Node.js. Also, like new runtimes like Dun are slowly making things faster, so it might not even be necessary in the future to worry about Golang, alright? Or like worry about this. So JavaScript is so slow. What is the use of this serverless teachings? Do anyone ask this in interview? Prisma seems good, but Hono I don't like. Believe it or not, here's my prediction. Okay, Hono becomes sort of the standard for writing code because it lets you deploy application in various runtimes versus Express only lets you, Express won't work in a lot of, call them new runtimes. Even for Bun, it took them a long time to support Express. So that's the reason I introduced Hono. What's the other thing? What's the other use of serverless teaching? The only big use of serverless teachings is you're able to deploy backends without paying $10 a month. Cloudflare lets you deploy backends immediately. That's the only big reason for it. Related to Docker, so feel free to push it towards the class, and if not, totally fine as well. Let's look at it. What if I specify middlewares for some? Okay, answered that. Okay, one more set of questions. Okay, I've done almost everything correct. My user is successful, but I don't know why I'm not able to create a user. Let's see. Model name user. I don't see any like a very descriptive error here. Can you confirm your database has migrated? It has a user table. That would be my first guess. Just open it in pgadmin or PSQL it and see if you're able to actually see a users table. That would be my first guess. The error isn't very descriptive. Oh, there you go. Code P5010. P0 means it cannot connect to the data proxy. Could check the client. Yeah, so it seems like it cannot connect to your database. What could be the reason for it? Your connection pool URL might be wrong. Yeah, basically that's my guess right now. Your Postgres URL is incorrect, is my guess, based on the error code that is coming here. How I would debug is I would run it locally without a connection pool URL and try to see if that works. env for both. This is the database URL. What do you mean env for both? And why are there two? And this probably shouldn't be the Postgres. Wait. Do you have this in the Wrangler.toml file? Do you have this in the .env file? If yes, then this looks right. Cannot fetch data from service. You're seeing the same error again in here, P5010, which based on this specific document right here, or whatever the GitHub issue was, tells me you're not able to connect to the database. So try getting a new database. Try migrating a new database. Try running it locally without a connection pool URL and see if that works. That's how I would debug it. Your code looks right. Nothing wrong in it. Everything looks right. Seems like your machine is not able to connect to your database. I mean, the error is a little different when that happens though. So yeah, the way I would debug this is I would start Postgres locally, replace this URL with a local database URL, see if that works. If that works, then I would get another database in AVN and see if that works. And that's how I would slowly, incrementally debug this. Yeah, you don't have to use connection pooling if you're running it locally. So run a database locally, replace this database URL with a local URL, see if that works. If that works, that probably means your machine is not able to, either connect to this URL or Prisma is not able to connect to the database. So that's how I would debug your application. Cool guys, let's call it here. I will see you guys tomorrow, and tomorrow we will try and move forward in everything we've done today. All right, cool, long class. All right, a few more questions, but yeah, I think I'll call it here. We've added a middleware here, so it should not be applied to sign up. It should not be applied. Can we use middleware in some? Can we use? I mean, yeah. So I added that global middleware. You don't necessarily have to add it. You can add it, as I said, in front of the function, right? Something like this, in the route. And why did someone post this again? Oh, that's your code. That's breaking. Let's see. Transfer endpoint. This thing. About transaction. There you go. Mongoose.start session. Start transaction. Can you await this? Probably need to await this. Can you put an await over here? Find one. Yeah, I think that might be it. Let's see. Why is this? Oh, it's a different branch. Oh no, I haven't waited it. I mean, try that. Probably won't fix it because I don't have it here either. But that's my first guess. But yeah, I'll just have to clone it locally and try it. Yeah. Let me keep. I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to get to it, but ping a TA with it. If not, I will look at it. Let me bookmark this for later. All right. Let's call it here, guys. Thank you everyone for joining. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.